John McMullen is back with NFL news and notes, as he does each and every day at this time. As there's a lot going on around the NFL as we lead up to the Super Bowl now. We've got Senior Bowl as well this week. Johnny Mac, how are you, pal?
Doing well, guys. Thanks for having me.
Anytime, my friend. And obviously, we know that there's a lot of news and notes going on around this NFL as we get ready for Super Bowl 51. And some of it around the comments of one Ben Roethlisberger. And I want to start there with you and get your opinion on that because Ben Roethlisberger kind of hinted today that, he might think about hanging him up. And, would you be surprised if at the end of the day, Big Ben handed over a lot of money to say, I don't want to do this anymore?
Well, I'm always surprised if people would give back $18.6 million, which is essentially what Ben would be walking away from as far as a signing bonus. It's about 40, I think 45, 46 total. So that's a lot of money to leave on the table, even though he's made a significant amount of money. And generally there's a new generation of player that's sort of Zach Orr and Baltimore being the most recent, who sort of weighed the safety aspect of it and decided to walk away from the game at a very, very young age. But let's realize Ben's 35, so that dog's kind of already hunted. But the way he plays, he takes a physical beating. So the fact that after a season he's contemplating it, it happens a lot because it's such a grind. You almost have to get away for a number of weeks to recharge the batteries. But I expect Ben Roethlisberger to be back on the field next season.
Now Tomlin said it's not the first time that Roethlisberger has talked about this, but he said he's taking the comments seriously. You wonder, if Roethlisberger looks at that team and thinks that maybe this was his best shot and that, taking a step, in the future that they might, this might have been his best opportunity because where do the Steelers go now? They've got some interesting things. There's a lot of disparaging comments coming out about Antonio Brown and whether or not maybe the Steelers want to move on there. You've got Martavius Bryant, who's going to apply for reinstatement, but, there's no guarantee there. There's a lot of uncertainty, it seems, around the Steelers moving forward.
Yeah, well, now there is. There wasn't about 48 hours
Isn't it funny how that happens around teams that lose?
Exactly. And when you talk about, obviously, the reports coming out about Antonio Brown, look, I don't know if he's more worried about numbers or not, but I do know he's very, very productive. So I don't see the Steelers wanting to walk away from him anytime soon. You mentioned Martavis Bryant. Now, granted, you can't count on him. That's obvious. But if somehow he does sort of right the ship and get his career back on track and becomes a more responsible person, all of a sudden that offense only gets better. And then you talk about Ladarius Green, who's barely played this season because of concussion issues mainly. If he's healthy, all of a sudden that Steelers offense could probably rival Atlanta. Now they have to get Le'Veon Bell re-signed, but I expect them to do that. And obviously Ben's got to come back. And that might be a lot of ifs, but the majority of them are almost guaranteed. As I said, I expect Ben back. They're going to re-sign Le'Veon Bell. Antonio Brown's going to be there. Green's probably going to be healthier next season. And we'll see about Bryant. That would be the one that's up in the air. But if that team returns, well, the Pittsburgh Steelers are really good again.
John McMullen with us. John, Andrew Brandt for the Monday Morning Quarterback does not believe that there will be a robust market for Tony Romo. Now, where do you see Tony Romo next season?
Well, Tony Romo he's old and he's got a lot of injury problems, and he makes a heck of a lot of money. So I think that's what Andrew was trying to say, is that at that pay rate, no, there's not going to be a lot of teams falling over each other to try to get Tony Romo because there's no guarantee he's going to be able to stay on the field, forget about long term, for one season. You're talking about a guy who hasn't played those snaps against the Eagles. The one drive were his first since Thanksgiving of 2015. That's how long he's been off the field. So clearly, there's going to have to be something worked out wherever he lands, be it Denver, Houston, or another city. No one's going to pay Tony Romo in the $20 million plus range to play quarterback in this league with his recent injury history. So he's going to have to understand that. He's going to have to rework his deal. And I think that will happen. And once he comes to that realization, the market will all of a sudden become very, very robust because there's so many teams in this league desperate for a quarterback. From his standpoint, you would think you'd want to be at a contender, and obviously Denver and Houston would top that list.
So sticking with quarterbacks that could be on the move this offseason, Brand also mentions that it's delusional, his word, to think that Jimmy Garoppolo will fetch a first-round pick. Will Garoppolo be a hot name on the trade market, and which teams will be lining up for him?
Hey, it only takes one. It only takes one. And I agree with that delusional adjective because there's no way he should garner a first-round pick. But we just talked about that word, and desperation. For instance, Cleveland is first and foremost. Now, if they don't believe any of the quarterbacks, Deshaun Watson, Mitch Trubisky, Deshaun Kaiser in the draft are worthy of that number one pick, they have the number 12 pick. And I got news for you. There might not be a quarterback at 12 because even though as we start the draft process and people say those guys aren't worthy of being at the top of the draft, we see this every year at this time. And teams are so intent on fixing that particular position, especially bad teams, they push quarterbacks up the board. So if the Browns are not going to take a quarterback at number one, there's no guarantee they're getting one at 12. Then all of a sudden you have to talk about the trade market. And they would be, to me, a team that would be willing to take a chance on a quarterback like Garoppolo. And the other would be the Houston Texans because of Bill O'Brien and his history with New England and the respect he has for that organization. That makes sense. But in Houston, the same thing with Tony Romo applies. The fact that Brock Osweiler is an albatross on that franchise, and the reason Bill O'Brien's not very happy with it.
John, you mentioned Deshaun Watson. We all saw him in the national championship game. Doesn't go to the Senior Bowl. He was asked to go by Cleveland. Do you think he should have gone, and where do you see him ending up in the draft?
Yeah, I think he should have gone. I think it only helps you. I think there's some of that mentality of trying what we saw going on behind the scenes with the Sixers over the years and agents trying to steer their prospects away from Philadelphia. We're seeing that with Cleveland. I think Deshaun Watson is signaling he wants no part of the Cleveland Browns. But from the Browns' perspective, and Hugh Jackson has already stated this, they're not going to let that affect them. They're still going to do their due diligence, and that's how they have to approach it. If they believe he's the number one pick, they should take him and let the chips fall where they may. And once you get in a situation, if things start to improve, as we've seen with Joel Embiid specifically, Ben Simmons seems relatively happy with the Sixers. That thinking can change very, very quickly. So while a player like Watson probably wants to steer himself away from Cleveland as an organization, hey, you just have to realize there's some collateral damage from tanking, and you just have to go about your business.
John McMullen's with us. Of course, check him out at 973ESPN.com and his national NFL coverage at FanRag Sports NFL. And, John, I find it interesting. We didn't touch a lot on Mike Groh yesterday, but we did kind of hint at how important the secondary coaches are. And not the secondary, but the secondary guys, meaning not the coordinators, in getting the best out of their talent. And reading your stuff last night on Groh, you find out, okay, here's a guy that worked with Alshon Jeffries, who had his best season, and just got a 1,000-yard season from Kenny Britt with really a disastrous quarterback situation there. So I guess you could put those two names higher up on the free agent list for Philadelphia. You feel that way?
Yeah, I do. If they want to go in that direction, obviously a player like Jeffrey specifically would cost a heck of a lot of money. We talked about the lack of success this organization has had in the draft with wide receivers. However, it really doesn't none of that is on this group, because obviously Howie's back in charge, and even if you want to rewind back to where he was in charge in the past, Joe Douglas wasn't here. So it is a completely revamped personnel department. So it kind of depends on where they want to go. Do they want to solve the issue in the draft, or do they want to go free agency? And if they want to go free agency, yeah, those are two names that Groh would obviously be very, very comfortable with. And as I said, when it comes to that first pick, it's got to be a playmaker. So whether it's a wide receiver or whether it's a running back, where you project certain guys to go, the Eagles need to get sort of that game changer on the offensive side of the football. You can go about it in different ways, but that's the way I think they're going to try to tackle the first round of this draft.
All right, LeBron James, calm down there with your playmakers.
Hey, they got to do it. They got to do it, because what we've seen, unless you're the Atlanta Falcons or unless you're the New England Patriots and you got 6 different guys and quarterbacks that can move the football around to all of them, the hardest thing to do in the NFL is to go on those 13, 14 play, 80-yard, 85-yard drives. And the reason is obvious, because it leaves more chances to make mistakes. It could be a false start. It could be a holding penalty. It could be a drop pass. We've seen that a number of times. Mm-hmm. It could be anything. And as those drives go on and on, as I said, there's more opportunities. And how do you fix that? The quick strike, the big play, like this team used to be so adept at when Deshaun Jackson was here. And those explosive plays, and they just haven't had that, and they need it.
Yeah, no doubt. And some reports that the Browns very likely to franchise Terrell Pryor. Would he be a guy that fits your playmaking mold that you're kind of hinting at?
He would, but I would be very, very careful with that. Obviously, he's a tremendous athlete. Obviously, he is capable of making big plays, but I think for the Eagles specifically, I would want a more well-rounded receiver. And Pryor, let's face it, is still making the transition. As impressive as it was, not the best route runner in the world, not the best technique-wise, nor should he be. Because he's making the changeover at the professional level. It'd be nice to have as a luxury, but I think the Eagles, for Carson Wentz's sake, they need a more well-rounded receiver than Terrell Pryor would offer.
Yeah, I want to go back to something you talked to about Atlanta, by the way, because I find this to be interesting that Atlanta, we were reading this yesterday, that more money was placed on Cleveland to win the Super Bowl than the Falcons. It kind of shows you how little they were regarded at the beginning of this season, and quite frankly, with good reason. I mean, the Atlanta Falcons have not been very good the last couple of years. I mean, go back to, when was the last time they really had a big year? Was 2012 when they went 13-3. After that, they went from 13-3 to 4-12. Then 6-10, 8-8, and then boom, here they are. What did the Falcons kind of do to get to this point? What stands out about why they're here as to what and why no one thought they would be here?
Well, I think two things. I think for years, you mentioned 2012, they were so close to the Super Bowl. They were driving for the game-winning touchdown, and Matt Ryan injured his shoulder, if you remember, on the last drive of that game, and that probably cost them a chance to go to that Super Bowl, and they kind of fell off for a number of reasons. Offensively, they've been a mess on the offensive line since then, and all of a sudden, they were the only team in football this season where all 5 starters were there for all 16 games. And getting Alex Mack from Cleveland, he's the leader of that bunch. Jake Matthews has kind of taken off. So it's much improved on the offensive line. They've always had the playmakers, we know, with Ryan and Julio Jones and the running backs. And defensively, obviously they brought in Dan Quinn to replicate that Seattle defense. A lot of people have tried it. Gus Bradley tried it in Jacksonville. And you saw during the second half of the season, they started to come on. And what they did is they drafted really, really athletic kids at linebacker and at safety. And even Bill Belichick is already on his conference call after winning the AFC Championship game. He mentioned on film, defensively, this looks like the fastest team he will see all season. So they've started to do the right things. They've started to pick the right players. It started 2 years ago when they drafted Vic Beasley in the top 10. He's in the Defensive Player of the Year conversation. So they just did a really, really good job in the draft. They fixed the offensive line problems. And once you have that and you have the quarterback already, you're off and running.
All right, John, plenty more to get into on the Super Bowl. We will, of course, we'll pick your brain on that. Senior Bowl, looking forward to some of your takes on some of the prospects. You know, saw your retweet over at JF McMullen. Brian Dawkins down there. Joe Douglas down there for the Philadelphia Eagles as they are being represented at the Senior Bowl this week. And we'll dive into a little bit more of that later on in the week and more Super Bowl conversation. NFL news and notes, it never stops. And John has got it at JF McMullen on Twitter. All right, pal. Take care.
Hey, thanks, guys.